Welcome back to User-Centered by Design, a podcast where we talk about all things related to user-centered design. In this podcast, we will focus on topics in the medical device development realm, but the principles we discuss can absolutely be applied to other industries as well. I'm Nicole Kelly, UX UI designer at Sunrise Labs.
I'm Kelly Catali, principal human factors engineer.
And I'm Alex Tyrion, the director of user-centered design at Sunrise Labs. And today we have a new friend.
Hi, I'm Dave Hibbard, director of programs at Sunrise Labs.
And today's episode, we're going to talk about where we have crossover between agile development processes and user-centered design. We found that there's quite a bit of crossover that works well, and we want to share our experience and some things that may help to find success within your own team. So let's get started off.
All right. Well, we've already introduced Dave, director of programs here at Sunrise, and he brings a wealth of experience to our team and our conversation today to talk a bit about Agile and development processes in general, so we can set the stage for the rest of the conversation. So, Dave, can you explain to us the two most common methods in medical device development?
Yeah, so for a long time, medical device development was done doing a waterfall approach, and this was an approach that was originally recommended by the FDA, and really almost even more than recommended. It was written into a lot of the procedures that they published. In somewhat recent, we'll say the last 20 years or so, Agile has become much more readily acceptable, and certainly the commercial development space, but even into the medical development space. So in a waterfall process, all the design is done up front. So the product is conceptualized, designed, then implemented, and then tested. In an Agile approach, it's a much more iterative process. So the idea is to be able to get feedback from users or testing to iterate on the product and influence the way the product is developed, designed, and the way that the user interacts with it.
Awesome.
What are some of the advantages from why you would do one versus the other? What did Waterfall get people when we were using that a lot more frequently in medical device development?
I would say a couple things. I mean, one, I don't think people really had the concept of Agile, before maybe 25 years or so ago. And so Waterfall was really the most common process out there. A lot of the program management techniques come out of construction industries and things like that, where you're doing a plan, you're ordering materials, you're constructing sort of a road, and maybe that requires bypassing an on-ramp or off-ramp, and then building the final product that you want. In medical device development, the concept of using Agile really has blossomed over the last 25 years, and I think the main reason for that is that many people have realized that doing an iterative approach allows a much better control over what the final product is, and a much better target as to what the final product should be, in terms of being able to get feedback from users, develop a minimal viable product instead of something that was originally envisioned, and also allowing you to change with the market over the course of the development. So there are a lot of medical device products that are developed over a long period of time. So you have problems to deal with like obsolescence, changing markets, competitor introductions of products, and the Agile process allows you to really look at your product and make sure that you're not developing something that is at that point months or years out of date.
It's funny, I just had a thought about Agile in the construction industry. It definitely wouldn't work the same way. As you were describing it, I'm thinking, you're right. That's how things started back in the day. Program management really probably, a lot of its foundation is foundation, no pun intended, from construction. And Agile definitely wouldn't work in that instance, but it does have a lot of value in the medical device realm. There
might be some unforeseen agility in that industry with, hey, I made your kitchen. I don't like it. You got to redo it. It's the most painful form of Agile. So yeah, and as we talk about the crossover and what Agile process, the philosophical approach that we brought up earlier, that iterative approach is really where user-centered design, it happens, being able to figure out what isn't working, how to refine, how to retarget based on what we learn as we go. And I think that's going to be a theme that resonates throughout today, is that if we can anchor on some of these core philosophical approaches, that's where we have found, what we like about it. One more softball for you, Dave, is what has led Sunrise to adopt Agile approaches, because it's something that we try and do across the board here. So what led us to that, and what's been your role in that process?
Yeah, so I just want to talk about a couple things there. So one is that in the medical device industry, it's hard to follow a pure Agile technique. The medical device industry is governed by the FDA, still has certain criteria it has to meet. Such as plans need to be developed before implementation can be done. Design needs to be created before you develop a product, and acceptance criteria needs to be created before you test or verify a product. So what we've done at Sunrise is we've adapted the Agile methodology into different phases in an overall waterfall approach. So we still have a design phase, an implementation phase, and a test phase. But within each of those phases, what we've done is adopt Agile to allow us to quickly iterate across each phase, but most definitely inside the development phase. So when I came to Sunrise 5 years ago, I guess 2016, I had been using Agile at another company where I was previous to this. And when I came into Sunrise, it looked like it could be a good fit for the type of projects that we do. We do a fair amount of software, but we also do system engineering, UCD, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering. And since we do our heavy software, it was a great place to start and introduce a company to the Agile methodologies. And I think it's really benefited our company in being able to, one, as I said before, really concentrate on the minimal viable product, but also have much better prediction about when we're going to be done. Is the project tracking to a schedule, tracking to a budget? Are we getting done the stories that we want to get done in a certain period of time? Are we getting good feedback from the users or the product owner? And I think Sunrise has really found those techniques invaluable over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, and really has helped to develop and grow our development processes and our company as a whole to take on bigger and more complex projects.
Yeah, I personally have seen it as a real benefit to the way that we run programs here. It makes the integration of the kind of techniques that we look to do in a project work really well. Fair disclosure here, Dave is actually one of the best PMs that we've worked with collectively at integrating user-centered design into a medical device process. And it's been a benefit to learn some of the rules of the road of Agile from the programs that we've worked with you. And we're certainly not experts in Agile approaches, but we appreciate getting to work with folks like yourself who are. So
I think the greatest thing about the combination of both Agile and the user-centered design approach is that they both have this iterative process: design, implement, evaluate, and repeat. And you can just repeat and repeat and repeat until you end up with what you want. And that makes both of them work together great, right? So let's go through a sprint. Let's develop some feature that can be evaluated. Let's evaluate it. Let's get feedback on it. And then let's iterate that design and try again until we get it right.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. And so when we go into these, there's the planning up front, and there's the strategic focus that we can take to this. So as we're thinking about where we're going to learn and where we're going to iterate, one of the parts where I feel like UCD has been able to meet the team halfway is to come in with a focus on the strategy. What do we know from a product owner that they want to have from a product experience, and be able to prototype those things early, and to really lay out a program of effort where we can say we know what the focus and the strategic priorities are in the product, either from a human factor standpoint or from a design standpoint, and start getting into those as part of the plan early on with the sprint, and then get those into evaluation so we have enough looks at the key areas of the product. And Kelly, with your area of focus around human factors, do you want to talk a little bit about how that strategy can come together to benefit the program?
I think when you've been talking about iterative approaches for both Agile and then UCD process, the first thing that comes to mind from my world is formative studies. And oftentimes what I find is companies that don't incorporate UCD well will forget that formatives are coming up and the amount of effort it takes to prepare and plan for it. And that also takes coordination with team members and having this plan and this strategy ahead of time saying, okay, we're going to have 2 formatives and then a summative. We can work in the planning for those formative studies and allow for teams to put effort forth in, maybe we dedicate a sprint to create a branch of software so that we have a prototype to test in formative. And by integrating that strategy, that human factors sort of strategy from a higher level into the whole sprint planning and the bigger vision, helps us stay focused. It helps us meet our goals. And admittedly, it helps us bring visibility to our plan in general. I think we could potentially end up getting lost in the details, or our team members, our counterparts in software or electrical or mechanical might not be as focused on when a formative is happening if we don't communicate it in some way. And being involved in sprint planning, being involved in helping create some of the backlog helps bring that visibility right to the forefront so that people can think about what features need to be made and what feedback are we going to be gathering so that maybe we wait to implement something until a little bit later after we've learned about it. I know I'm rambling a little bit, but there's a lot to talk about here. And I'm like, so many things I could talk about from integrating with human factors. But I think from the bigger level, the strategic level, having those big milestones for planning for formative really helps on a lot of levels.
Yeah, to sort of give an example of what Kelly's talking about there. So in a lot of cases, if you're doing a user interface, you may have a lot of structure that sits behind databases and APIs to other devices or cloud structures. But in the short term, you want to get feedback on just the user interface that the customer is going to interact with. So you may break off a part of the team, or you may develop a specific set of stories inside of a sprint just to do the user interface without actually connecting that user interface to the underneath structure. And that would allow the user-centered design team to go off and do a formative and gain feedback while the rest of the team kind of continues on and works on some of that infrastructure in the interlying sprint in between while the formative is going on.
Much better said than I said. But oh man, I had something I wanted to say and now I completely lost it. Oh, what I was going to say is that can be really disruptive if you don't plan for these kinds of activities, building that interface to be able to test. And then what happens if you don't plan for it is you either have a bunch of extra effort or the formative has to get delayed because something's not ready. It just allows for a lot smoother planning and execution in the end, from my experience.
Yeah, I think that's true. And another sort of topic I wanted to bring up there is just, I think a mistake that a lot of people make is they do one of two things. Either one, they plan their formatives much too far apart. So they look at the formative as almost a verification activity that what I've done is correct rather than getting feedback up front. And that's really, I think, kind of against the whole Agile concept and the concept of, UI and human factors in general. And then the other mistake I think that people make is not to include user-centered design or UX design while they're developing. So it's not practical to a formative after every sprint. If you're doing this every 2 or 3 weeks, you can't go out and visit 10 users and get feedback, but you have people that understand and have studied that environment, between the product owner and the folks from user-centered design. So, getting the feedback from them at every sprint is key to making sure that you keep moving forward and you're not going off on a tangent to what really the product you want.
Yeah, I would definitely say making sure that, like you said, UX designers being involved in that sprint process definitely helps facilitate and almost quicken your feedback loop. Even if you're not doing a formal or summative study, you can definitely get feedback quicker and more efficient if you can add in the UX or even the UI at some points in small bite-sized prototypes so that during development, you can test it and check in with your product owner and make sure that you're on the right track so that by then, there's more ample opportunity to make changes instead of just having everything done at once and then having to go back and revisit something where that can cost a lot of time for the developers. Because once the UI designer or visual designer is done handing that off, it's sometimes a project on its own, and making sure that you're in line with your developers, your software developers, can really help speed up that process so you can attack it in more bite-sized pieces.
Attacking definition of the features, most of what you're going to find as problems, or most of what you're going to find as misinterpretations when translating an intent into code, we can flesh those out a lot sooner and make sure that it's meeting the product owner's vision, to meeting the demands of business, meeting the mental models of the end users in the design efforts that we're trying to do up front, and eliminate a lot of the ambiguity for how to interpret a user story, where to take it with how we've written it with the context. And it reduces a lot of potential confusion throughout the development process, and leveraging diversity of interpretation up front in looking at very different options around each of the features. You can get a lot more uncovered quickly. And even if you're just ending with a rough prototype to say, and make these changes with a well-defined development and design handoff, between two team members who know each other well, you can solve the rest with whiteboards. It just works a lot more quickly and more efficiently. So as we talk about this iterative process and learning through building, Let's dig into that a little bit more and talk about what that looks like in terms of, when Agile is doing a pure software learn and build type approach. Dave, what do you expect from the software side of testing and evaluation that's going on over there? And maybe Kelly, you can complement it with some of the ways that you've used, user-centered techniques and human factors techniques to complement that well.
Yeah, so I would say a couple things. So one, just kind of going a little bit back to the previous topic, as a program manager, one of the great aspects of having a good involvement, heavy involvement from UCD, is that it gives me an expert in that area. So I have a software lead is my architecture expert, and my systems lead is my requirements and risk expert, and my UCD lead is my UI expert. And I think, as a lot of people realize, when you have something that's visual, be it the enclosure of the device, or in this case particularly the UI of the device, everybody has an opinion about it, and everybody thinks their opinion is right, and it can cause a lot of diversity within the UI. So having to be able to point back to one group or one person that says, look, this is the person that understands the UI, this is the person that studied the user interactions, I think helps to cut down on a lot of unnecessary churn, which is, from a program management standpoint, fantastic.
Opinion is never part of the conversation. I have never experienced this before in my life. I don't know what you're speaking about.
So to go on, you're asking a little bit about, what are some of the ideas in terms of making sure that the software group from an Agile standpoint is performing well. So one is to make sure that the stories are complete and not open to a lot of interpretation. So, I suppose in the pure sense of Agile, the stories might be a little bit vague, but I think as you work with a user-centered design group, you need to make sure that while you're in the sprint, the stories that you are implementing are well-defined and have good acceptance criteria. That way you've not, in essence, saddled the software engineer with having to think about the design as they go through trying to implement something. They have something in front of them, they implement it, they focus on the architecture, they focus on implementing the best code that they can, they focus on reviewing each other's code, but they're not necessarily focused on, is this a good UI or is this not a good UI? That responsibility lies with the UCD group. And then if it turns out that the UCI that you created, that UI that you created in that sprint, it is not the best, then that's what Agile is all about. You get to reconsider, you get to evaluate, and you get to try again. And that's I think that process really lends itself well. It keeps everyone focused on their areas of expertise and kind of think stop some of the confusion within some of the team members.
Alex, you had asked me a question about how does it relate to gathering feedback from a human factors perspective. Can you maybe elaborate?
It was even a little bit more about how it complements well, or how you can seamlessly utilize those opportunities to improve what we're doing across the board.
Well, one thing that I've found really valuable just being involved in the Agile process for development teams is being involved when we're talking about defining the stories that go into the sprints. If there's some input that I can offer, or if we're defining acceptance criteria and maybe there's something related to, for that story, maybe there's a use error that I know is related to this design. Maybe this certain feature is mitigating a potential use error. We can add some language to the acceptance criteria to say, hey, let's make sure that this use error is mitigated, because ultimately it comes down to, from a human factors perspective, it comes down to mitigating use-related risk. And I'd say that's one key component with how that aligns with my contributions. Otherwise, there are other ways that I can gather quick feedback at the end when we have at the end of a sprint, we might have something to show to either, as Nicole mentioned, to the product owner, or might even be able to do some internal quick checking. I know that I've brought stuff to folks internally and just said, hey, can you try this? Or, hey, can you tell me what you think about this? Not in a formal gathering, like if usability test kind of format, but a quick touch point of someone who doesn't know the product at all. Can you give me some feedback on it? Where we can turn that around really quickly to the developers.
I definitely think that's not thought of a lot. You can get some great feedback by your peers just by making sure you can get, and it may not be up to the level of a formative, some of those really, what's the word I'm looking for? Some of those like really defined problems that you may need to solve right off the bat. But if it's something where it's very, it's so beneficial to have that fast checking to make sure that the interaction that you're creating is going to give you the result you're looking for. Because sometimes, even though you're developing it with a very, thoughtful process, you can miss some small things just because you're in the middle of work. So it's really good to check in, even with some people on your team, that you're working on the same project or you're not working on the same project. So you can get an even broader, look at testing, quick tests, just to get some more feedback. More feedback, the better, especially in terms of Agile.
Yeah, I love the idea that we are always pushing, which is how do we lower the barrier for touch points with the user? And there's always an amount of expense. There's always an amount of planning and commitment that goes into, getting a really deep look. But whatever we can do to find less formal, more frequent touch points, either through local, people who might be closer to the user group, or trying to find lower cost ways of approaching the same problem, of getting more looks at the problem, because no one gets it right on the first time. And, I think that's been one of the key successes for our team integrating with, Agile focused development is, trying to get more iterations in so that we're succeeding. And we've even done it on the hardware side, as we're trying to find fit to human problems that or solutions to problems where fit to human is an issue. We're looking at that. We're building prototypes quickly, roughly, and what is the minimum viable learning experience that we can drive? And it isn't just a software. It's the most commonly applied form of Agile, but we've had success with longer sprints that allow for more hardware development, bringing electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, and industrial design into the picture to be successful with the application of it. Dave, when we talk about that, what's some of the learning process that we had going beyond software with this? You're probably one of the high art folks here for what we do with Agile.
Yeah, so there's definitely a couple things to consider. So one is that the process most likely is foreign to them. So people working on the hardware, electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, probably may have heard of it, but always considered a software tool, not a process that could be applied to other disciplines. So one of the things you need to do is you need to make sure you break down the stories into small, bite-sized chunks, if you will. So, on the software side, we like to see stories that are in the range of 1 to 3 days, and we usually end up doing, for a team of maybe 3 to 4 software engineers, 3-week sprints. If the team is larger, maybe 6, 7, 8 software engineers, then we would most likely have to have a dedicated Scrum Master, and the sprints probably would be shorter, more along the lines of 2 weeks. In the case of hardware, again, you want to try and get those tasks as small as you can. So, instead of saying design a circuit board, it might be design the power input to the circuit board, design the display interface, those types of things, design the touch interface. And one of the things that we've really tried to do on the software side is we develop things in bite-sized chunks. We review them. So we actually have our source control database set, so you can't promote code into the source control database unless you've had at least 2 people review and approve that software. So you can follow a similar process on the hardware side, where, again, if you're biting off a schematic or something into smaller units, you can review that particular section of the schematic before you either check that into your source control, or if you're using Altium or whatever the case may be. Certainly before you go to any kind of layout, you would want to do review on that as well. And you can apply that to the mechanical side in a similar fashion. The other thing that I would bring up there is that you need to consider how you are going to integrate with the tools that you have. So for instance, if you're using a tool like SolidWorks and PDM, they may have their own workflows and their own way of controlling the drawings. So you need to be able to make sure that your Agile process and task management process coincides and really gets along with the process of controlling 3D models, drawings, etc.
One of the other parts that I think, especially from an industrial design workflow, that we have to think about when we're integrating with Agile is the creative tension that will exist between a design process, which I think is very compatible with Agile in the fact that it looks from a user perspective, how are we defining the product? But the design process a lot of times is looking from sort of bigger picture, less fidelity passes at defining the product, and sort of, eliminating possibilities and then getting into the details. And so looking holistically at the experience of the product and then getting into the subcomponents where, part of Agile is breaking things into bite-sized pieces. And so part of the process of especially industrial design is bringing in a way of incorporating those kind of early thinking of the product and early definition of the product to allow them the space earlier on to get through that end of the funnel before getting into breaking apart the product into individualized component experiences, because that's usually where you end up with less consistency and less coherent design experiences. And I think just as you were talking about SolidWorks and that workflow and how you're able to incorporate the way that mechanical engineering tools work, that sort of big picture view is a key part of any designed experience and flowing into there. So let's bring it down to some brass tacks here. As we think about the practical reality that we can help people with here, what are some of the things that we can help share from our experience that people can take and apply to increase their success as a team, combining these disciplines? What do some of you think are key areas of focus for that kind of successful integration?
Yeah, so there's a few areas that come to mind. One would be just making sure your stories are complete, making sure they're right size, they're not overscoped, they're not too ambiguous, they have acceptance criteria. Don't give the team something to work with. Don't just give them a blob and throw it over the fence and be like, okay, see what you come out with. Let's work together and lead that team. So that's one. I think putting too much into a sprint, I think, is a common mistake. So you're like, I got to get this done. I got to get that done. I got to get this, this feature in before, the 1st of March or whatever the date may be. And you end up putting a lot of stuff into the sprint. I think it causes quite a bit of consternation within the team, as you're not going to get that stuff done when you plan it. You come to 3 weeks later, it's not done. Everyone's like, we feel like we failed. And then you repeat. So making sure that you're learning from the sprints that you've done in the past, looking at the concept of velocity or some other metric to know how much you can get done in a similar length sprint with a similar team, and making sure that you don't over plan, I think, is also fairly important. Nicole, looked like you had a couple things you wanted to throw in there.
Yeah, I did have a question. I was curious on what your thoughts would be and how beneficial you think it is to have UCD a part of that early process in, device development or project development, definitely in sprint planning meetings as well, because sometimes I've often heard that even though there are, linear approaches to both design and product development and software and stuff like that, that sometimes it may be beneficial for some UCD aspects, or in my case, UX UI designers, to start almost a sprint ahead to give the developers or the software, engineers something to work with as well as working with them. In other cases, what I mean is having a design at a point where we can hand off some materials. We're still working, but they're still working, but at least having that buffer room before they know they have to start working, if that makes sense. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so at Sunrise, what we usually try and do is we usually during the design phase, so we have what we call phase 1, which we do write a lot of the plans. We also write architectures and requirements documents. At that time is also when we want to do the first pass at information architecture, wireframes, that type of stuff. And maybe, if we can fit it in, even a formative on that information. Then we can look at some of the styling of the UI, some of the information layout of the UI, what kind of features would be available, easily, and what kind of features are maybe hidden under a menu, that type of thing. And then I think you're absolutely correct. As we go through and do the sprints, in an ideal world, a feature that's going to be implemented in sprint 3 is gone through the UI UX process in sprint 2. And, from when I run a project, I like to include those types of tasks as part of the sprint process. So, I'll have a story in there that says, develop the menu system or develop the settings window from a UX standpoint, so that when we come to the next sprint and I always say implement that settings feature, then we know exactly what that's going to look like.
Yeah, I think that works really well. And I think it's really good to have that type of information beforehand, and definitely a good handoff for the developers. It creates a good relationship too, I feel, working on the team, because you definitely have that good buffer space and you're not too stressed out or worried that you're not going to have something well defined enough for a developer when your hands are tied as well. So I really appreciate that process that we do here at Sunrise.
Yeah, I think speaking of the relationship, it really gives the software engineer someone to go to, right? So they know, they're like, okay, I'm going to be working on implementing blank feature, but they know when I come to the next sprint and that first feature is done, I want to work on the next one, that whoever's doing that UX work has already gotten that to them, and has a good start on what it's going to look like and how it's going to end up. So that relationship, I think, ends up being key.
Yeah, I think that definitely ties into the second point we kind of had, which is making sure we're holding effective sprint reviews and making sure that everybody's voice is heard within a sprint review or a sprint planning meeting, to make sure that everybody's heard and everybody knows what they're doing.
In addition to sprint reviews and sprint planning, also, I'd say the best experiences I've had with Agile development is when we have regular Scrum meetings as well, not just once or twice a week, but every day, because it gives an opportunity for the team to gather and ask quick questions, or not even ask a question, but more, hey, Nicole, I'm going to find you after the meeting because I'm having trouble with whatever. Kind of opens up the door for that communication and visibility within the team, rather than waiting until the end of a sprint to make it known that there was an issue, or having someone have to discover it by reading a comment in a ticket that they may or may not see in a timely way. So the Scrum meetings also, I'd say, are really, really important. And especially helpful for keeping everyone engaged with the UCD team too, and allowing us to share where we are in our tasks, which might be a bit more nebulous to some folks than potentially a quick software development feature effort or something like that.
Yeah, the communication that takes place there. So the formality of the Agile workflow of, hey, Scrums need to happen and should be daily or every 2 days, just to make sure that everybody's got a touch point. They're checking in, they're talking about what their progress is and giving updates on their velocity. It's another way of lowering the barrier to communication. Any sort of over the wall is the death knell of good design. And, embedding with the team. And, one of the parts that Nicole and Dave, you were talking about earlier, is the relationships. Good design in an Agile environment happens from democratizing the understanding of design. And by investing in those relationships, our peers start to learn how to appreciate what the intention is, what the philosophy is underlying the design of the product. And they can take that and run with it. They can also find logical inconsistencies. And it's yet another way of lowering the barrier to improving the product and getting more iterations. And anything around this is good communication. And that's kind of the key to all those little points that I was just talking about, is that we're getting FaceTime with people. We're an integrated part of the team, and we're helping to make sure that everybody feels like they're accountable for a great experience, because no one holds the keys to that kind of creativity.
Another place where the relationship really matters is it's easy or maybe even common for the architecture to really prevent a good UI, and the UI to maybe prevent a good architecture. And those two teams really need to work together, or else you can be putting false constraints that really don't need to be there in the way that the UI is going to flow and work based on the way the architecture was created. So they both need to be considered as you're developing the software, both the UI side or the infrastructure and database side.
That's my least favorite moment, is when you get to the third to last sprint or second to last sprint, and you're sitting there and you're like, okay, well, the right decision here is the architecture's locked, man. Things could blow up, man. Don't go back there. And those kind of conversations really hurt. And I love the fact that as a aside here, we've been pushing a lot of systems engineering here is big, and we have systems architectures. We've been doing a lot of parallel path of UX architectures, and then coming together right at the front and saying, okay, let's compare notes. What adds up, what doesn't add up, and sort of negotiating those things out by having walked through the user experience story in our, as a logical exercise to make sure that, foreseeable issues from a human experience standpoint don't make it, the architecture doesn't exclude them, or what an assumption is around the human story of it doesn't block a robust and stable architecture from taking place, because all of those things really do add up to the user experience. If you have a Bluetooth connection that keeps dropping every 30 seconds, like that's not a screen, but it's like one of the worst experiences that you can be chasing. Like every third word's dropping out in your phone call. That's awful. No one wants that.
Another issue that is in a similar vein is making sure that you handle error handling early on in the project. It's particularly the higher class of product that you're making. So if you're working on class 2 or class 3, there may be a lot of conditions that the device needs to be able to handle, and they may have to guide the users through resolving those particular error conditions. And if you don't consider those early as part of the initial information architecture and initial UX design, it becomes very awkward to the user, I think, to experience that error situation and then try and handle it with a UI. It wasn't really ever intended to do that. So, as part of having, the flow that the normal user would follow, you also need to really heavily invest and consider in what are the error paths that you don't really want the user going down to, but eventually that they're going to get there.
Yeah, and treating those up front, Nicole's been doing a lot of great work lately on the systemizing of the way our designs come together and thinking about their consistency at the earliest stages, so that when we apply design solutions to problems, they're driven throughout the product. And as we learn, then they become better. And I've really appreciated your work in that space, Nicole. It's been great to see that start to percolate everywhere.
UX is such a hot topic nowadays. I mean, if you don't have a UX engineer, a UX designer, a human factors engineer early on in the team, they're really trying to push that because, like you said, Alex, learning the user at the beginning and figuring out those architectures, making sure that you're not missing a system that needs to be fully thought out can really start breaking it and increase your scope tenfold if by, as what we said, the third, fourth to last sprint, and you need to finish this design. And now you need to rethink almost everything because you weren't iterating enough in the beginning or having enough user-centered thought in the beginning to really dive into those problems that some people maybe weren't even thinking about back then. I think it's really important.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to a point that we were talking about a little earlier, and maybe as one of the key takeaways that we can wrap up on is allowing the time up front, like you were saying, Nicole, to do some investigation of the design, but also thinking about it more globally, like I had mentioned earlier, because those global investigations of the entire product is where that consistency starts to stem from, and thinking about the architecture of the design experience before getting into the smaller chunks. That's where you end up having train wrecks at the end of a classic Agile program, because what is consistent within a feature sometimes doesn't scale well to being consistent for other features. And that's where the architectural robustness from a system standpoint, as well as from a user experience standpoint, can get out of sync. And, of all the points that I'd like to make as we wrap up, allowing the time for that global look to drive consistency throughout an interface and a designed experience, that's a big one for what I think is important for the integration. And what are some other ones that you all would like to make sure that people are walking away with?
Yeah, one thought that just kind of popped into my head is, have a little fun with it, right? So I would, for one of my projects, I'd love to have Alex create a persona of one of our users, and have Nicole just sketch it up and draw it out there, and I'll stick it on everyone's cube so they can always kind of keep that person in mind. It's just build the team, build the relationships, and I think things will go well.
I think that's a wonderful idea.
Me too.
Staying present in everybody's mind. It's whatever we can do to get rent-free space.
I think just being invested early into planning and recognizing that there is value in having integration with your UCD team members is key. If we haven't beaten that into the ground enough today, hopefully you can take that away and say, yes, there is a lot of value. It is doable, and it is incredibly valuable for the team.
From earlier episodes, one of the points that you've made in the past, Kelly, is being strategic about that. And so up front, if we know that there's a technology or an aspect or a clinical condition that is like high risk for our medical device, the features that trace to that, putting them up front in the build because we need more time with those to get them right. That's been such a key point that you've made over time, that it's a great success factor for the way that we do it. And it's probably something that other people can leverage.
Yeah, and a couple more things I would throw out there is, there's obviously lots of ways to approach product development. You can consider the monkey's typing approach, and if you get lucky, then you may get the fastest and the cheapest to the finish line to get exactly what you wanted. But most likely, it's going to end up in not creating a novel. It's going to create some disaster that needs to be cleaned up. So, by mitigating risks and bringing in UCD early and often, then you can, help guarantee the success of your product without, going off the rails, so to speak.
I'll make that check an extra $500 at the end of this. So, just so you know.
I'd say we covered a lot today in our conversation. This was really fantastic. And
yeah,
Dave, thank you for joining us. You provided a lot of insight, and it's clear that you have a lot of experience in this. And we're excited that you were able to share your thoughts with us.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. It's actually been a pleasure. It's great conversation.
It's been a ton of fun getting to hang out with you again. And, it's to our benefit to have somebody as experienced in Agile as you and who's seen enough in the trenches with user-centered design approaches that we're getting this kind of integration. So, it's great to have you as a partner, and thanks everybody for joining us today.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, Dave.
Make sure you're following or subscribed to our podcast channel to get the latest updates on our new episodes. You can find us on our website at sunriselabs.com or Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Thanks for listening, and we hope you tune in next time.